bookaholics, and welcome back to another standalone batch reviews. I started making these standalone batch reviews so that I had somewhere to reference back whenever I'm talking about any of the standalones that I have read, so that I don't have to keep explaining or keep giving full thoughts every time I mention one. Today we're going to be talking about classic retellings, so retellings of classic literature, and today I have 5 books to talk about, and I have a couple that are from the same book as a retelling. I am very excited to talk to you about some of these, and then some of these were slightly disappointing. We'll get the disappointments over and done with because they're not disappointments in and of themselves. It's more just that I don't like the original source material as much as a lot of others do. So we have 2 Gatsby retellings. The first one that I have is Wild and Wicked Things by Francesca May. This one has a beautiful writing style. It's absolutely stunning the way it's written. And conceptually, there are 2 elements to this that I absolutely love. One, we have this very witchy vibe, and it's a Great Gatsby retelling, and it's also sapphic. So we have this one woman who is a witch who then becomes somewhat enamored with this other witch who is the Gatsby character. And one of the issues that I think I had was that everything that was 1920s vibes was fantastic. Everything that was witchy vibes was fantastic. But the witchy vibes didn't feel 1920s, and the 1920s didn't feel witchy. So when the 2 would merge, it didn't work in my brain, and I don't know why. But on top of that, I'm not a big fan of Gatsby. So as much as I did enjoy this one, like I gave it 3 stars, that was entirely due to the witchy elements. Because as I said, I'm not an actual fan of Gatsby, and I thought reading retellings would make me like it more, but I feel like it made me like it less. So sadly for this one, it just didn't quite hit in the way I wanted it to, and that's not really the book's fault. It couldn't save the Gatsby narrative for me. It's not one that I'm interested in. And then on top of that, I couldn't quite compute the 2 different atmospheres in my head so that they could merge. I couldn't make witches and 1920s work in my head in this particular context. I have read 1920s witches before, actually, so it was just the way that this one was. It's almost like the atmosphere for each was so distinct and so well done that then trying to mush the 2 together didn't work for me. But I would still highly recommend it, especially if you're a Gatsby fan. I think that this one did a good job of that. It's just not my cup of tea. Another one that I am really sad didn't work for me because I really wanted it to work for me is The Chosen and the Beautiful by Nee Vo. This one is again a Gatsby retelling, and this time we are getting it from the perspective of Jordan Baker, who is the primary love interest of the main guy in Great Gatsby. So we're getting all of Gatsby, we're getting exactly the same story, but we're getting it from the perspective of Jordan Baker. However, Jordan Baker in this one is of Vietnamese heritage, and she got adopted as a child. She is also queer, and she has this odd kind of magical ability. So we've changed Jordan as a character, but the rest of the narrative is exactly the same. And one, I don't like Gatsby, so I don't feel like it warranted a retelling that was exactly the same in this context because it's not my vibe. But if you like the book and you wanted a different angle of it, I can see how this would work really well for you. My disappointment in this one was less it's Gatsby, because I knew that going in. My disappointment was we introduced some cool things, but they never really went anywhere. So we had interesting conversations about exoticism and like the racist side of exoticizing a person, which was mentioned but not tackled. And then we had how being queer and existing in this society works, and again wasn't really tackled in any depth. And then on top of that, we've got this odd magic that Jordan has that again just wasn't explored. So if you're just wanting someone to kind of like ponder things, then I think it would work for you, because I feel like Gatsby is quite ponderous at times. So it kind of is in keeping, but obviously for me it's that you've got 1920s and you've got an Asian person, you've got a queer person, and you've got magic, and we're not exploring any of them with any kind of depth, and that was a shame for me. So if you like Great Gatsby and you would like it from a different angle and to introduce some vague concepts of alternateness, I think you will like this. It just didn't work for me. The next one is the only fairy tale retelling I have on here. I have considered doing fairy tale retellings as a category. I much prefer going off of vibes, but this was one that doesn't fit in what we've seen a lot of fairy tale retellings looking like, and that is The Raven and the Reindeer by T. Kingfisher. The way that T. Kingfisher does fairy tales, especially in the retellings, but also with the ones that she fabricates like Flesh and Bone, I find that I am really interested in the way she goes about it, because there's something really mystifying and dark and ethereal, but at the same time makes you see potentially the villains in a different light, or see the way that the narrative could unfold in a different manner and still be the same story. And I think that she does that really well. The Raven and the Reindeer is a retelling of the Snow Queen. I did really enjoy this perspective because the angle in which we're tackling this story is like if Frozen actually leaned into the darkness of the original story. It leans into it so much more, and the creepiness, but the etherealness and the juxtaposition of the wonder and the darkness played out really well in here. So while this isn't my favorite T. Kingfisher, there are several others that I have liked substantially more. This was my first T. Kingfisher and set me on my path to make me want to read more by this author. So I had a good time reading this one, and I definitely would consider reading the other ones in this. Like, I think there's like Bryony and Rose or something as well that I would also consider reading, because I think that as much as I'm kind of fatigued with fairy tale retellings, T. Kingfisher is doing it in a way that really brings it back to its roots, and instead of romanticizing, it's more about this almost fae-like creepy etherealness that I am really vibing with. The next one I have to talk to you about is Pride and Prejudice in Space by Alexis Lampley. Now this one is an odd one to talk about solely on the basis that the text within here is pretty much word for word Jane Austen, barring a couple of things that change it to make it space-centric. So Alexis Lampley didn't write a book, she altered a book. So it's an odd one to talk about, but this one, first of all, we're going to talk about the actual book itself because it is absolutely stunning. The artwork within is gorgeous. You have this gorgeous cover, and then we have illustrations throughout. We have mixed media, including handwritten style letters and chat logs, for example, as well as world building elements that are done through mixed media format as well, which makes it a more interactive reading experience. So that is definitely additional. Then on top of that, we, as I said, have alterations to the text. The examples that I gave in the vlog in which I read this was the first one being that the first line includes space, like the word space. So we have, it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single space-faring man in possession of good fortune must be in want of a wife. And the other example that I gave is when they are talking about Mr. Bingley's wealth, instead of it being a chaise and four, which is a type of carriage, it is a chaise n, like the letter -4, which is now a type of space vehicle. So there are things like that that have added to it to make it more space centric, and that has been what the alterations have been. But other than that, it's exactly the same story. So if one, you are not a fan of the Regency setting but would like to read a very faithful adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, this could be one for you. If you've already read Pride and Prejudice and fancy rereading it and would like it in a different format, this would also be for you. If you are wanting there to simply be a more interactive version of Pride and Prejudice where you can get illustrations, you can see different types of media, the letters are actually looking like a letter, then that would also work for you. So I don't think this is groundbreaking in terms of storytelling because it's the same story, but I think that it's a fantastic addition to Jane Austen's fabulous works because it just adds extra elements to it that make it fun. So not anything that you won't find in the original book apart from illustrations and mixed media, but it makes for a fun new way of looking at the book. And the last one I have to talk about is Midnight in Everwood by M.A. Kuznia, and this one is a retelling of The Nutcracker. Now, this is a story that I have somewhat mixed feelings on. I really liked it, loved the writing style. I think that the storytelling of it and the ethereal whimsy of the story combined with this somewhere between Edwardian and Victorian setting, I think was handled really well. The way that the character's impetuousness is a central part of the story instead of her being this perfect girl. So there were lots of things in there that I really did enjoy, but it is quite romance heavy and I didn't buy into the romance. And this is the second time that this has happened to me with this author, which is a shame, but I just didn't care about the romance. And obviously with it being a Nutcracker retelling, there is quite a central romance. It's not, I don't think it's quite as central as in the Nutcracker, and I think that it's more fleshed out. So it does have that going for it, but I just didn't buy into the romance enough to feel strongly about it. So whenever it was leaning on the romance instead of the world or the peril of the kingdom, I just found it a bit not quite my thing. So 4 stars, because I think the bulk of the story and all of the craftsmanship that went into it was really well done. I just wish that I'd felt more swept away by the romance. So I would still recommend, and I think that I'm in the minority when I say I'm not as enamored with the romance as everyone else. So, you know, take that with a pinch of salt, but it was a good time, and especially if you want like the whimsy of a world and the etherealness of an alternate version of the Nutcracker, I would still highly recommend checking this one out. So there you have it, a really strange mixed bag of books going on here, from space operas all the way through to whimsical fantasy to borderline magical realism. I wish that I had liked the Gatsby ones more than I did. I did still have a good time with Wild and Wicked Things. I just wish that I had connected with it a little bit more. I definitely will read more from this author. So that is all from me for today. So thank you ever so much for watching, and I will hopefully catch you in another one soon. Bye!